Associate Professor and Director of Graduate Studies in the Department of Theater Arts at the University of Pittsburgh. Thank you for joining us for our panel, Creating Virtual Theater. Tonight, our panel will be in two parts. The first part will focus on the design tech student perspective, and the second part will focus on the faculty perspective. If you're interested in asking the panel questions throughout the entire evening tonight, you can tweet your questions with the hashtag #PittKillsMonsters. Now, I am happy to welcome the moderator of our student panel, Lisa Granshaw. Lisa is the founder of Geekfold and the associate editor at Backstage. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm thrilled to be here to moderate this part of the panel with the students. Welcome, guys, and thanks for joining us to talk tonight. I'd love for us to just start this panel where you guys introduce yourselves, tell us what your roles were for the show and what it involved. So anyone that wants to kick it off?
Okay, well, I'll go first. My name is Gabriella Welko. I'm a sophomore, an upcoming sophomore at Pitt, and I was one of the co-stage managers. And I'll hand it off to Annabelle.
Hi, my name is Annabelle Blackford. I'm also an upcoming sophomore, and I was one of the co-stage managers.
I'm Michael Russo. I was one of the streaming team members, and I am an upcoming senior.
Hello, I'm Nick DePinto. I was the sound designer for this production. I'm also going to be a senior this year.
Great, all right. Well, so for you guys, when She Kills Monsters came up, was this your first time working on a virtual production? And what excited you about the opportunity to work on the show?
So for me, this was my first virtual production, and also as well for Gabriella, our first time stage managing at a collegiate level. So it was a bit of a very new thing, but we really learned through it together. For me, I was really excited about it because we left school right before we were about to do Head Over Heels, and a lot of us were involved in that, and we were really sad when we couldn't do that production. But it came at a good intersection of time where I had been done with school for a while, and I was kind of done relaxing and getting bored and really missing theater. And so when Anne-Marie came to me with this opportunity to not only start my stage management career, but also get a jump start in virtual theater, which we knew would be a high possibility of our shows for the next year, I thought it was a really great opportunity.
For me, it was also my first virtual production. I was excited because for a couple of reasons, because I had worked on She Kills Monsters when Pitt did it the first time a couple of years ago. And also kind of similar, my summer theater plans had also been canceled pretty recently before that. So I was glad to be able to do something this summer, even if it wasn't traditional theater.
Yeah, this was a first for me as well, and it was a first diving into an entirely different field since I primarily work in lighting with live theater. Diving into streaming, which was an entirely different ballgame for me, was really interesting and fun to work through something new and still create something, even though my traditional element is not as prevalent when we're working through virtual and home setups.
Yeah, I think that, at least for me, one of the big draws to participate in this was that it was pretty much everybody's first time doing something like this. So I knew that if I was a little apprehensive about the process, that everybody would kind of be in that boat, and we were all working really hard together to get each other through it. And that mindset going into it, kind of like the unknown, is scary, but when you have such a good team that is okay with the unknown, it really helps kind of diving into everything.
Yeah, and so then with this being your first virtual production, what were some of the major differences that you had when you're working, versus in-house on production and then on She Kills Monsters?
Well, for me, the biggest difference was that I was in an entirely different kind of genre of work for myself. I had never done anything with streaming before. I had never tried to do anything with streaming before. So jumping in, it was like I was taking this leap of faith into a new area. to work and to find something that I could do when we can't be in our normal roles inside of the live theater space. So that was definitely really both intriguing, challenging, and scaring for me at the same time, just trying to push into this new area.
I would say for me, the biggest difference was communication overall. Because if we were in school, we would be able to see each other in the theater or on campus or in a hallway and just like give little notes or something that we would need to communicate. And all of that was transferred over to email. And so that provided a big learning curve, not only me learning how to send professional emails and quickly, but it was a lot. And I would say me and Gab would get around like 50 emails a day, and it was like our job to be on top of them and reading them when they came in. And we would be kind of astonished if there was like a 15-minute period in the middle of rehearsal where we would like not get an email about something. So that was the biggest hurdle for us, but I think it provided really great skills about being on top of communication and really adjusting to that for the show.
For me, from like kind of a sound design perspective, some of the major differences were that like just the way that the sound worked, like it was hard to like, you know, balance the level of the sound against the level of performers because it wasn't always going to be the same, since like some of the programs like change the level of audio like automatically, and also just like being able to like teach like my assistant or the board op the programs that were needed in a virtual setting as opposed to being able to like kind of be more hands-on about it was a significant difference that I kind of worked out throughout the process.
Yeah, and so then connected with those differences, what did you need to learn to do your roles in this online environment? And how did you approach looking for that information and gaining these, new skills to do so?
For me, I had to learn an entirely different streaming software that I had never had any experience with. I had never really worked in that. And so I had to jump in and start working through it and working it out. We had some of the professors and staff at the university actually come in and talk to us and help us and show us how to work through things. They were always there if we needed any questions answered, if they had the answers, or if they could look it up or help us with that. So that really helped us kind of learn and work through it. But it was definitely a steep learning curve since I had never had any experience with this kind of like software and programming myself.
I'll kind of agree with that. There were a couple of programs that I needed to learn how to do like for this virtual production, because I had had some experience with like sound editing, but then I also had to learn kind of a video editing program to like make sure that sound and video were aligned properly. So I had to learn new programs for this.
And even just like the simple stuff like Skype, like I had never used Skype before this process, and we originally were starting off on Zoom, and we had a couple weeks with classes to like kind of get used to Zoom, but it was still very unknown. And like, even if you're a very tech savvy person, it's very strange putting your whole life online all of a sudden. And then especially something like the process of creating a production, which is so in person and so like physical, and like you have to connect with people and communicate with people and show your work and work with each other to create a final product. Using even simple things like Skype with all of the weird quirks of the program and like having so many people on it at once. It was a lot of just kind of finicking with that and being okay with not really knowing how to do it at first, and just working from there.
I would agree with Gab on that. I think just like Zoom, Teams, and Skype, using all three of those platforms all for the first time since May. But that was really figured out with Googling. and trial and error. Me and Gabriella had a lot of test calls with Anne-Marie before we started rehearsals. That was always really instrumental into success, was trying things with a very small group of people before you pass it on to a larger group of people.
Yeah, and so I think you've touched on this a little bit throughout, but to kind of come back to these challenges that you've faced, what were some of the ones you would say were your major challenges, and how did you work through them?
For me as a stage manager, I think the biggest challenges came around tech when Annabelle and I had to be in contact on Microsoft Teams, which was our platform for the crew and tech, and then be in contact with the actors on Skype, and then also make sure that everything was running smoothly. So being able to hear both conversations at the same time and switch off between programs to make sure that everybody understood what was going on and we could relay information back and forth. I think that was probably the biggest curve to get used to, because I mean, we have the experience of being on headset during a show where at times a lot of people are talking and collaborating, but this was like headset times 3. So it was definitely a big challenge.
I agree with Gab on that. It was like us learning how to first be a collegiate level stage manager, and then also how to co-stage manage, and then also how to stage manage a virtual show all at once. So it was a lot for us to learn, but I think it was a really great process. But the most important thing was everything was one step at a time. Like, you had no idea what was coming for you that day in rehearsal, what problems would arise, who would be there, who wouldn't. And I'm so grateful that we had such a strong team to work through those issues. We never got caught up. We never got angry at each other. It was like a really great process. But I think most importantly, it's support and communication and patience are the 3 things that you really need to pull off a virtual show.
Yeah, I really appreciated the patience that everybody had, since what I ran into for probably the most difficult part of the whole process was a lot of technology issues, since we were all working off of our home computers, like the computers that we had been using for schoolwork, things that we didn't expect that we would have to be streaming out huge show files for, with like 20 or 30 people inside of a Skype call that you're then on, as well as running a show off of another program with all these different inputs. It became a lot of strain and stress on our computers. So that caused a bit of difficulty across, but with everybody being patient and calm and supportive, it really helped us move through those issues and difficulties and find different ways around it to make the beautiful work that we did.
Yeah, I think other people were talking about it too, but one of the major challenges, especially during tech, was the the way we did our headset, because you learn the rules of a traditional headset, right, in tech, and then with Microsoft Teams you have to learn it all over again, kind of, because you can't like if you're trying to talk to one person who's like next to you, you can't just like turn off your mic and talk to them. You have to there can only be one person talking at a time, so you have to make sure that you're not interrupting people and overruling people or whatever. And I don't know, just like learning the newer rules of how virtual productions will work.
Yeah, and there are a lot more people on the headset than a normal production would have. There was the streaming team, there was sound, there were the board op for sound, 2 stage managers, and then plus the producers and all of the faculty members that were there to help us answer questions if problems arose. And just there was just so many people that it was kind of, a wait and like see if you can get something in, unless we were like running something. The general like communication process when we were like holding was a little stressful because of the amount of people.
And like, at least for me, I know some other people had this, but I had both headsets just on angle. So I had one ear that was just the Skype call and the other ear that was the Teams call. So at times I would have two different voices, like 2 or 5 different voices all going inside of like one ear or the other ear at different times. So it was very confusing for me at times and hard to just like discern at first, but then you start to learn people's voices like a normal kind of calling situation, and then you can like then I can think like, oh, this is Annabelle speaking, oh, this is Gabriella speaking, oh, this is one of the actors speaking. You learn to get those little issues discerned and fixed out, for me, at least on my end.
Sorry, Michael. I think the biggest beast that we had to tackle across all platforms was the internet. And just in a normal theater, I have never encountered something that you just have no control over and that you cannot do anything to fix it. And that was the case with a lot of people who had internet problems. Like, it wasn't their fault. Sometimes they didn't have the access they needed, or their computer didn't have the processing power. And those just aren't issues that you can't fix easily. And figuring out so many different ways to get around that truly astounded me, streaming team, Anne Marie, Eben, everyone who helped actors figure out different ways, get Ethernet cables, move to a different room, have everybody in your house get off the internet. Like, so many things we came up with to try and get everyone's internet connection as stable as possible, I think was really great.
Yes, speaking of stable internet, I disappeared there for a sec. Sorry, guys. But I do have actually some questions for you from those watching. And so at Mr. Evans Beard is wondering, can you tell us what programs you found most useful, and were there any that you abandoned because they were less useful than you hoped?
For us, for at least the streaming team, what we ended up using was just this streaming program called Streamlabs Obs. So we used that for our streaming platform. It ended up giving us some troubles, and that was things that we had to troubleshoot and work through, but we ended up using that as our final streaming format, and using Skype specifically because it had this special little program that we could use called NDI software, which we could then use to individually take everybody's Skype pictures and audio and put that into the program and layer it, instead of having just the Skype room as a whole just in a big box on the screen. So we could do a lot more with what we had.
Yeah, and we did start on Zoom. That was like the original intention, but as Michael explained, Streamlabs was using Skype the best, and that was just the way to go. But it was kind of a strange process moving over to Skype because a lot of us hadn't used it before. But Zoom does not have like the capability that Skype did with Streamlabs, at least not yet. But so yeah.
Yeah, there were a couple times when we like tried to use different programs that just like didn't end up working. I know for me, one of the problems that I was having was the way we kind of shared audio. Like, everyone in the Skype call could hear it, but then like the person playing it couldn't. So I had to like try a few different programs to get that to be fixed. And one of them just like didn't work because it was free for like a little bit, and then they said it's not going to be free anymore. And then I had to get rid of that. And then I ended up just using like GarageBand to like record the sound and then play it back to you, which is like kind of a janky solution, but it kind of worked. And also just like learning some of the different programs. Like, I ended up learning Adobe Premiere, and then I stopped using Adobe like Media Encoder because I couldn't figure out how it worked. So just like a lot of trial and error, figuring out what programs work and which don't.
Nice. We have another question here from Christina Klaus. I really liked how the background also became a foreground, going over some characters' video in some scenes. How did you do that?
So that was all the ability and amazing talent of our two scenic designers, Cami and Jess. What they did was they had made cutouts in their actual photos that they were uploading, and then layered the rest of their the rest of the image on top of that so that we could have those little cutouts to place people into. And then when we were in Streamlabs, what we could do is then place those overlays that we got all the way on top, and then have everybody's inputs under that, so that we could create a more of that layering effect ourselves. They were great, and they did all that work themselves. And they had to do a lot of cutting and resizing for when we had actual actors in, and sometimes the actors where we had them positioned didn't work out. So it became a lot of back and forth with trying to get everything to look as good as it could.
Yeah, it looked amazing. We have another question here from the Neezer. How is working a show in a virtual environment similar to the traditional live theater environment?
Well, I'll say, oh, sorry, you can go.
Oh, no, you go, Nick.
Okay, so I think basically like the way problems were worked out was very different, but I feel like we had a lot of the same problems arise. Like, you know, this background doesn't work in this scene, or this person is entering too early. And some of the solutions to those were changed to fit the virtual production, but some of the, like most of the basic problems were the same. So, you know, if the sound is implemented differently, but it's the wrong sound kind of thing, like you change how it's fixed, but not the problem.
Yeah, and during the rehearsal process, a lot of similarities arose with the actors. Kind of, okay, if we were running a scene that you know you're in, put your camera on, make sure that you are ready to unmute yourself, just be ready like in that sense, so that they were present, and everybody was still in the room, but if you weren't participating in the scene, then your camera could be off and you could be muted. So it was kind of like you weren't there, but you were kind of waiting, standing by to get into the next scene. So a lot of the process on the actor side, it was different, obviously, because of online, but a lot of the kind of similarities were weaved through.
And I think their community of theater really came through as well. Still, I feel like all the people within the tech side and all the actors, it felt like we were still that tight-knit theater community that we have in live theater and when we're on campus here. Whenever there was like a little bit of downtime, if it was somebody needed to work something, or if I needed to do sub programming in Streamlabs or anything, like the actors would be able to sit and have that kind of community with each other, and we would have that community with them as well. So it felt like we were still in that homey environment that theater gives you. And that's what I really appreciated about it.
And I think one of the most comforting things about the similarities was the schedule. Like, we had about a month before we started rehearsals, we had weekly production meetings. Even though it was quite a tight schedule, we had about 2 weeks of rehearsal, but we still had like paper tech and dry tech before we had 1 week of tech, and we still sent out rehearsal reports, tech reports, performance reports. Like, all of the scheduling and the way that people were called was all the same that it would be in live theater.
Great. Well, we have some follow-ups from those that were watching. So the Neezer is wondering, did you use green screens or the virtual background?
We use green screens. Every actor had their own green screen that when they were inside of Streamlabs, we then used a filter called chroma key to key out the green within their green screens. It was very hard for that because we had to make sure that everyone's green screens were very taut and well lit to make sure there wasn't as much graininess as we could come through as we had. We wanted to make sure there was not as much of that graininess that sometimes happens with green screens if they're not fully pulled and lit the way that they need to be. But then what we would do is put a image background behind them. So it was a little bit of that layering coming in again, using both.
Yeah, and that did require a level of planning on the side of being able to get the green screens to the actors, because the actors were all over the country. So thankfully we had the scenic people, the props people, and Anne-Marie working on, basically the faculty trying to assemble the green screens, and then Annabelle and I compiling where everybody lived so that they could be shipped out properly, and then making sure there was a line of communication so the actors would tell us when they received the green screens and if they had trouble setting it up and stuff like that.
Well, Mr. Evans Beard thanks you guys for your response and says he's working on similar things. Did you have the NDI software on the performers' computers or just on the receiving end?
It just needed to be on the receiving end. So what we had to do is download some packages that were that had all that NDI software in it, and then another package in order to allow us to use it with Streamlabs. So then what we could do is take the feed individually as long as the people were there. The only people that really needed to do anything in terms of capturing video and audio were those who were actually like implementing it and working it, compared to the people who were just the ones that we want to see and hear. But it was all on our end for the most part.
Well, speaking of those who might be working on something similar, for my last question for you guys, I'm wondering, what advice would you give students working on virtual productions in the future?
Patience. Just kind of trust the process and trust that everybody involved is really doing everything they can to make it work. And there are some things that you cannot control, such as internet problems and the capability of the technology that you own. So if you're patient and you really just kind of do everything you can, there's nothing more that you can do, So if you just have the right mindset, I think that everything kind of works out.
And I think one of the most important things, at least for me, and I think for the team going into it, is that there are no expectations right now for these shows, that they're so new, that really take advantage of the novelty and the creativity that you can bring into these shows and do things that people haven't done before, and limits that people previously hadn't tried to push. And to really trust your team members fully and take every opportunity to make it better that you can, and just keep working around the problems until it happens.
I think another really important thing for at least my end was planning and researching as much as you could. Having that extra month ahead of rehearsal time to really look at all our options, plan, see what we could do, and make sure that what we were doing could give us the best possible outcome that we could have. That really helped me, and being able to research some and look into what I was doing helped find the avenues that we wanted to take. Of course, there were pitfalls where I did not do enough research, or other people did not do enough research, and we encountered problems. So it's always good to double check, triple check, look at all the avenues that you can, and make sure that you know what you're getting into.
Yeah, I would agree with everyone. Kind of trust your team and trust yourself, and be open to the many changes that will happen, especially in the tech process, because you make as great plans as you can, and then they fall apart in an instant. You have to be able to be flexible, but yeah, just like being open to change and trusting that you and your team know how to make this happen.
All right, well, that's great advice for anyone who's going to be doing this in the future. Thank you for sharing your experiences working on She Kills Monsters. And we'll now kick it over to the faculty portion of the panel, Dr. Michelle Granshaw moderating.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, students, Nick, Michael, Annabelle, and Gabriella. I'm delighted to welcome our faculty panel. And I'd like to just kick things off by asking everybody to just introduce yourselves, explain your role on the production and your role in the department.
I'll go first. I'm Anne-Marie Duggan, and I am the chair of the theater department, but in this, I am the mentor for lighting students and stage management students.
Hi, Ricardo Villaraja. I am a lecturer at the Theater Arts Department at the University of Pittsburgh, and I was the co-director of our production. I'll kick it off to Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly Trumbull. I'm Ricardo's co-director, and I'm a teaching artist at the University of Pittsburgh. And Gianni, go for it.
Hi, I'm Gianni. I am the faculty member in scene design and scene painting, and co-head design with Anne-Marie as well.
And so I know with this production of She Kills Monsters, it was our first summer production that we've done in recent memory. And I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about why the department decided to do a summer production this summer, and what were the pedagogical goals behind the decision?
Well, I'll kick it off because I think it was my fault. I'm the one that kicked it off at the beginning. I saw that the play was released for a Zoom version, and I thought, oh, in this sort of summer, and all the students at this time, as I was reading this, students every day, a student's summer stock went away. So every day, one student less was working, and then eventually none of them are working. And I thought, well, there is a high possibility, and this has gone back and forth. I'm sure this is happening to everybody across the country. One day, I think we're going back to campus. We're going to be able to social performance. Oh, we're never going back to campus, right? Like, so it was an unpredictable world. So I thought, well, if we're going to end up online for our main stage and lab season, we should really learn how to do it. And what better way to do that in the summer when we don't produce, so nobody's really looking at us. So I called Ricardo and Kelly and said, well, I know you guys, it's your summer, but here's this possibility. Do you want to go for it? And they graciously said yes. And then, of course, we have to have our secret weapon because nothing at Pitt can be done without Gianni Downs, in my opinion. He is our secret weapon. So I think you could ask anybody on the faculty, why does everything get done, Gianni Downs? So then when this group was, and Karen Gilmore helped with students with costumes. And then when the group was together, we're like, all right, let's go for it. And now you can watch on video where we ended up.
I think it also, as it seems like theater is going to be heading in this direction, at least for a little, for the foreseeable future, that we might as well prepare our students to, to have a leg up, to learn how to do this and do it effectively. And like Anne-Marie said, it was a great way for us to do a low stakes way of us to learn together to do this before we kick off the regular season. We were able to do a virtual audition or an on-camera audition workshop with students before this, so that it's not something we were doing before, and more auditions are going that way. So it was also a good way to put that into action. And tech folks especially are being hit really hard right now. I mean, I think all artists in general are being hit hard, but tech folks in particular, like there's no sets being built right now. And without sets being built, there's no lighting to go on them, right? And so at least actors have some online readings that they can do, not that they pay well, but at least there's something. Yes, I speak from personal experience. But this was also a way for our tech students to not only have a gig since everything was canceled for the summer, but also there's people aren't doing this. Like they're not doing backgrounds, they're just doing virtual readings. This is a way for our students to be at the forefront. So it was super exciting, and they killed it. So they did not disappoint.
I think from a pedagogical perspective, it also sort of allows us to marry some of our department's core values that stand when we're producing in actual theater with this newfound strange technological world that we're living in right now. In terms of the story, in terms of the way that we approach the actors' work on their characters, and also like the rehearsal process in general, I think that those pedagogical ideas, you know, ring true whether we're working here or whether we're working in an actual theater. And I think for the tech students too, like the collaborative nature of the work that we're doing is the same if we're on campus. It's just a lot of the technology that we're working with now is completely unprecedented. So yeah.
I'd just like to add that although Ricardo said low stakes, nothing that Anne-Marie produces ever stays small or small stakes. And with every, it felt like day, things just got larger and larger. And I do want to applaud our students who literally produced this. You know, it was amazing. So that's really, pedagogically, I can't say more than they were given a challenge and met it with, you know, flying colors.
Although in Anne-Marie's defense, it was the New York Times that made it much higher stakes.
That's true.
It wasn't Anne-Marie's fault. Not that we're not appreciative, but.
And so when the departments first started having conversations about the show, what were the major concerns that the faculty were talking about, both in terms of creating and producing the virtual production, but also mentoring the students going into it?
I think for me, the first thing is, can we do it with them all across the country, right? As a professor, not to be overconfident, but when I step foot into the theater with the Pitt students, I know that I can solve every problem. And I think Annabelle said it, right? When you step in there, and I was like, oh, I think she gets that from me. When you step into the theater, I feel there's everything that comes up, we can solve, right? Like it might not be, it's not always the way you wanted to solve it. It doesn't always come out how you wanted, but you can solve it and get everybody to a compromise that is healthy, and will move the show forward. And here, I didn't know if we could do that, right? Because I've never done this. I never used the technology, right? Like literally, Michael and TJ were the two students that did the streaming. Pretty much, I put them on the plank and I said, walk out there and see if you fall off, right? And supported them as much as we possibly can with the help of the staff and faculty, right? Like we were behind them, but we still said, you gotta go. So that was my biggest fear. Am I this time asking for something we can't do that I won't have a solution to when we get there? But you know, if I'm asking him to walk in the plank, if I'm watching those two students walk, then I got to walk the plank too. So I just went out there with them, crossed my fingers, and like the student said, trusted the whole team.
But Anne-Marie always has a way of making all of our concerns sort of irrelevant, because I feel like everything that we set out to do, we were able to accomplish to some degree, while learning a lot. I know a major, not obstacle, but challenge for Ricardo and I was figuring out how to stage a production that is so physical, that is so visceral, that has so much happening, with people who are like now living in tiny little boxes. And feeling like we're telling the story as successfully as we would be telling it if it were on like a huge stage. And I do give tremendous props to our student designers, Cami and Jess, because they created such an amazing world for the actors to live in and the actors to play in, even though we literally saw them the same way that you're seeing the four of us right now. So I will say Anne-Marie is a fearless leader, and for some reason, even though I'm always like, oh my God, are we gonna be able to do it? When she commits to something, I'm like, all right, okay, I guess it's gonna happen. So it's really great to have somebody who operates that way at the helm, you know?
Like, I also know that she places a lot of trust in us, which I appreciate. I mean, like my biggest fear, I don't know if I had any major concerns. Like, you know, once Anne-Marie's like, we're going to try this and we're going to figure it out. And I'm like, okay, we'll figure it out. Like, we'll do this as we go. But I wanted to make sure that any student that we cast, I didn't want anything that was not their fault to hinder them from participating. Like, you know, we had one regret that we have still is that we had one student overseas that just couldn't, we cast her originally and she just couldn't do the show. because Skype didn't work where she lived. And we tried to figure a workaround and we just couldn't do that. And that was my biggest fear from the start is if people wanted to be involved and they were committed, that I wanted to be able to include them because I wanted this to be as good a learning experience for as many people as possible. And I feel like we were able to do that, except for this one student, which we're not perfect beings, right? We did the most we could.
So the students talked about the technology a bit already, but the technology, as you've all touched on too, was a big concern from the beginning. And so I was wondering if you could share the department and productions process in terms of selecting the platform and technology used for streaming and the rationale behind why the department ultimately used what it did.
I feel like ultimately we trusted Michael and TJ's advice. Originally, Ricardo and I were pretty adamant about being on Skype. And I think that the reason, and Ricardo, you can please chime in if I don't want to speak for you, but I think the reason we felt that way is because we had become accustomed to using Skype because that's what all of our classes were taught on at the end of the semester. Yeah. And we were just more familiar with it. And also we both had experiences with Skype where we felt like it maybe didn't work quite as well as Zoom in terms of the streaming, in terms of like the way that we dropped a lot of calls on Skype, things like that. But Michael was pretty insistent about the use of the scenic design working much more effectively on Skype, which is why we ended up going in that direction. And I'm sure Gianni and Anne-Marie know even more about this because they were in those Teams rooms constantly trying to figure it out. But
yeah, I can add to that. So I will honestly say that Michael answered this really well, but essentially we put all our eggs in a basket, which was to make it as visually appealing as our designers wanted to make it. And in order to support that, we needed to use certain programs that would allow us to manipulate where people's videos would be. And so that led us to Skype, so that we could have NDI feeds, which led us also to Streamlabs because most of our students had Mac computers. So we needed to make sure we had a free option that worked in both PC and Mac in case someone wanted to use it. So we were laying some groundwork for the future, but also in order to provide as much enrichment for the design students as well as the performance students. So that it wasn't just us hitting go and just watching the stream happen. But I will say to those people who may be watching who are on the older side of producing theater, this is much like when you start off and you're doing a lot of storefront theater, like you are just learning it as you're doing it, which is fun.
And so I just trusted everybody. I just said, you want to do that? Great, let's go.
And so how did the department navigate the audition and rehearsal process with students in different locations across the country?
It wasn't, the audition, we just did a self-tape audition. We did that workshop that I mentioned earlier a month in advance. We made it, we recorded it so that we made it available for any students who weren't able to attend the live workshop. And then we gave them a deadline. We decided not to have auditions because we knew the vast majority of the students who submitted tapes. And then we just looked at schedules and figured out the best time of day to have auditions. And then they all got links. Like, honestly, in some ways it was easier in a weird way. So, we have a thing that we send out to students, like a contract for all the acting students as they're entering rehearsal space that we tweaked a little bit for online. So, instead of arriving 15 minutes early, because who wants to sit in a Zoom room or a Skype room for 10 minutes with everyone muted? It's awkward and nobody likes that. So instead we're like, be 5 minutes early, but make sure your entire setup is set up before you join the room. Like, have your lights on, have your computer set up, have everything set up. So, we tweaked those things. And And then for us, it was much more about like blocking, and was a bit much, the original one is about fight choreography. This one was like much more about proximity to camera, or what part of the frame are you in? Are you out of frame? And then we worked with the designers to like move frames around. So the blocking was very different in that sense. Like we had to do a lot of pre-blocking, like first figure out, because Kelly and I had no idea what our capabilities were, was what can we do? What can we ask for? And what is asking too much? And then we've kind of figured that out together. And then we did the blocking, and then we did the actor blocking.
The blocking meaning where their blocks are situated on the screen to most effectively tell the story. And we also made the choice to have all of the actors present at every rehearsal, because I do think that something that is a little bit alienating about this online platform is the fact that we're not all in the same space together. You connect, but you don't have that like personal, like truly personal connection. And so by having everyone together for 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, it definitely contributed to us being able to build a more effective ensemble. And it was more fun that way. I feel like I got to know some students that I never worked with before. And I feel like they all got to feel like they're a part of the production. Some characters are in 1 or 2 scenes, some characters are in every scene. And I think it created a stronger community going about it that way.
Pedagogically, we don't usually cast understudies. And we ended up casting 2 understudies, both of whom ended up being in the show. So I feel like that was a really valuable experience for them, because they got to be in a show online for the first time, but also because they got to learn a lot about being an understudy and preparing multiple roles. Because like Megan had to step in for almost every character at some point or other during rehearsal. So she learned a lot, and she was always prepared, right? So I feel like pedagogically it also helped, as folks are like, oh, because I think there's a tendency, especially to look at understudies as like, that's a consolation prize, but it's a lot of work. Having been a swing in my life where I had to go on because one of the people I was a swing for went rock climbing and broke his back, and I had to like go on for him that night. I know how difficult it is. And Meg handled it she was just
amazing.
A rock star. Yeah.
And so I was fortunate to see the show, Kelly and Ricardo, when you directed it the first time for the department in fall 2018, and then you directed it again when it moved to the August Wilson Center in spring of 2019. And you've already mentioned, right, how the fight scene shifted, right, both in the script and how you had to conceptualize the blocking, right, thinking about the screens and what options that provided. What are other ways that your experience as directing the students shifted, and how did it change how you worked with actors and members of the production team?
Well, interestingly, I think each production was targeted at a different audience. So when we were working at Pitt, obviously we had primarily Pitt students seeing the production. When we moved downtown to the August Wilson Center, we were literally tailoring the production for a group of people who love Dungeons and Dragons so much. And then for an online audience where we are, opening up Pitt Theater to people all over the world, hopefully, it's interesting to think about how slight things change, talking about the way you hold for laughs, the way that the audience interprets the story that you're telling. Online, like, we don't have that luxury. Those actors who are performing, via the internet, they don't get to hear their audience's reactions. So trying to communicate to the actors in the production what that experience will be like. And also simultaneously trying to instill in the actors that acting online specifically is it's technically different, right? You're not speaking to your scene partner, you're not looking in their eyes, you're trying to talk into a camera with great intentionality, the same way that you would be doing so on stage, but you don't have the gift of having someone to react to. So how do you go about creating a truthful performance when you take away that piece? And so working with the online production, that was a particular challenge. I mean, and having limited experience with acting in this online platform, for me, it's incredibly challenging to do. It feels very unnatural in a lot of ways. So those are, I guess, my key talking points.
Yeah, and this play especially because, you know, especially the one in the virtual realm, or like there's two worlds in the play, right? There's like the real world and the what do you call it? The fantasy world, and the fantasy characters are bigger than life, right? So there's essentially two acting styles, kind of, that you have to be, you know, like you're reacting to scene partners in the real world, but in the fantasy world, these characters are larger, but you're still in a box. So then there's this kind of balance point where you don't want, if you're too small, then what's the difference between your real life character and your online character, right? But at the same time, if you're too big, nobody wants to watch you. So all the actors kind of had to find that balance, which was, I thought, fun and exciting, but, you know, like, and you can't move a lot also, right? Because then you're out of frame. So those are little things that I think the actors had to learn pretty quickly, and I think they did a wonderful job. But there was a lot of us driving home like, act to the camera. You don't want to see the top of your head. Like, just like little reminders. There's something else I was going to say. Did I write it down?
It's also strange to be able to see yourself, because on Skype, you can see yourself in a little box as you're acting. And so fighting the urge to be like, what do I look like right now? Like, do I look, you know, do I look good? Do I look like I should look? Is a whole other thing as well.
Yeah. And, that's what I was going to say. It's like, Kelly and I early on had a meeting, and we're like, we had to fight this urge for perfection. Like, you know, the students said it really well, which is like, there was a lot of things we can't control, right? We can't control internet speed. We can't control what computers people use. If people drop off the call, they drop off the call. So what we had to do is keep everything positive, right? We had to keep things going. We couldn't let all of these things bog us down. Like, and Kelly and I are both very much on the rehearsal should be a positive place, right? One of the things that we were early on said, actually the first rehearsal, we said, we need to make this a brave space, especially since there's so many unknowns. And part of that brave space is being comfortable enough to take risks. And if you feel criticized or you feel judged, you never take risks. So as educators, it's super important for us to make it as a welcoming and open environment as possible. Yes, sometimes the internet crashes. Sometimes their computer shut down unexpectedly. Sometimes our computer shut down unexpectedly. So we just had to be like, all right, that's what happens. While we wait for that person to join us, let's chat about what we just did. All right, we'll set up, we'll do it again once they join. Like, let's keep it positive. There's no sense in, you know, we're all trying to tell the same story. So let's just focus on the story and not all the limitations.
Yeah, and building off of that, right, thinking through these challenges and our responsibility as faculty to mentor the students through those challenges, we were able to hear from the students about how they navigated that and what they felt the biggest obstacles were for themselves. So what do you all think were the biggest challenges the students faced, and how did you approach mentoring them through them?
I think, yeah, I don't remember if it was Annabelle or Gabriella or that we were all together, but we were talking about it at the very beginning, and talking about, okay, we're going to do this. You guys want to do this, and I really want to do this, but I'm scared. And I said, yeah, I'm scared too, right? So in the mentoring of them is to just be honest, right? And just be like, we don't have it, right? Like, I don't have every answer. I wish I did, but I don't. So I think I found the mentoring of them to be patient, which is part of mentoring, but put a little bit more patience in it instead of, not rigor is the wrong word, but like, hold back. You know, in the theater, I don't really raise my voice, but I might be stern, like, no guys, we gotta get this done. I try never to do that in this process. I try to be very like, okay, what is wrong? How can we help you? And so it is a different type of mentoring, and being able to hold that patient line, even though I'm in my attic, like I want to throw something because it's so hard right now, right? But like, I can't throw something and I can't throw words. I have to be like, okay, how can we help? What do you need? I think that's what I said the most in this. Like, what do you need to get this done and how can we help? So I think the mentoring is really a much more patient and listening place, because you don't, like the student said, you don't see them in the hall, right? So I might be in tech when I'm on campus and see that student and saw that the tech pushed that student to a limit. And then I see him in the hall next day, I get to say, hey, how you feeling? How you holding up? And they're like, you'll know, they'll instantly be like, oh, I'm over yesterday, I'm good. Or they'll be like, that was hard. Do you think it's gonna be hard again? And we could have a conversation about that before they go back into tech. Here, I don't, in this virtual world, I might see them before tech, but maybe not, right? And also making sure that they have no guilt about the technology they're using to make this happen, right? Because you don't want them to take that on. Like, we can't, before we invite a student to be a part of it or audition a student to be a part of it, we can't say, what's the bandwidth you got at your house? Like, that's, right, we can't do that, it's unfair, right? So we know that we're gonna deal with whatever those limitations that come at us are in the best, most patient way that we can. So, yeah, so it taught me a lot about myself, right? And how I can I do think I will go back in the theater, which hopefully will be sooner rather than later. But I do think I'll be better mentor when I go back in the theater, having had this experience of having to really look at how I speak, how I do it, and do it differently. Like, whenever you learn to do something slightly different than the way you've always done it, you get stronger. So I think the students who participated would get stronger, and I think I will get stronger as well.
So I would just add to that, in this environment, the inability to help. So a lot of our process was Anne-Marie saying, well, what do you need? And one of our team saying time, and no one else could say, okay, well, I can take this chunk from you. So it was literally, you felt like you were in a room unable to help someone who was struggling through something very difficult. And so, as Anne-Marie was saying, just be as supportive as we possibly could, take what we could do off their hands, but also letting them do it. They took ownership, and it's the student's show for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, to sort of go off what Johnny was saying, I think thinking of this whole experience, as a faculty member, mentor, and as a student, but thinking of it as a learning process, something that, like, we don't know the answer to, something that we're all in it together, and we don't know what the outcome is going to be, was really useful. And I think that in this situation, when you don't know how things are going to work, or where things aren't working the way you think they should be working, it could potentially be really easy to get very frustrated. But if you always go back to the fact that, like, it is a learning experience for everyone, it sort of grounds you and puts everyone, like, on the same page and everyone on the same team.
Yeah. I do feel like our department has always been pretty good about saying, I don't know everything. Like, I don't know, let's figure it out. And I think we've always been, since I've been there, all 7 years almost. But I agree with Johnny. It was really hard when you're mentoring somebody to go, I don't know, like, what do you need? I think I need this. Okay, I don't have that. I don't know how to give you that. And it was hard. A big challenge for Kelly and I too was, like, we wanted to give notes to the tech folks as directors, but we don't know what we're doing. Like, we don't know any more than they know more than we do, actually. So I don't know how to give notes because I don't know what I'm doing. So I don't know how to help them tell this story because I don't know what the capabilities are. So that was, yeah. And then that kind of goes into the next question that we had talked about, which is, like, takeaways and what we would do differently. And I just think I would have wanted to be in more of the tech meetings, not because I have any plans on being on that end, but just because the more I know, the more I can help students with what aspects of storytelling we're lacking or what we can work on together. Because I don't know, I didn't know what to give notes on, and that ended up being really a difficult thing.
We have some audience questions that follow up really well on the conversation that you all just had. And so at Christina Klaus asks, how do you teach students something that you're still learning?
Collaboration.
Fake it till you make it. I think you let them know you're learning, right? I think that's something we said, Gianni and I definitely said from the beginning, was like, this is new to us and we're doing something. So in some respects, we're older, right? So we have more experience. So we know, you know, Gianni and I both, Gianni and I have done a lot of summer stock. So we knew we were going to survive. But, you know, I think 3 or 4 times I called Gianni up and said, oh my God, are we really going to have a show? And Gianni's like, yeah, we're going to have a show. We're okay. Okay. All right. We're okay then. Right. So, so I think it's being honest. And when I didn't know, I would just say, I have no idea. A number of the times I said to the stage manager, I'm not sure how we should do this. What do you think? Or what do you want to do? Or how do we move it forward? And we would sort of figure it out together in the moment using their gumption as students. Like, they're going to make fun of me for that word, but their gumption and my, you know, experience as a person who's have done hundreds of shows in my life. And when you put those two things together, we made, you know, it was never going to be a perfect union because we had never done this before, but we made a really strong bond there, and we were able to get through anything, right? But I will say that the student I think we almost broke is Michael. I think if Michael was in this room, he would say that's true. Like, that's a student who I think we pushed to the edge. And I don't really like to push, you know, I don't believe in the tear them down to build them up model of teaching. I don't believe in that at all. So that was painful for me to go through, because I couldn't just go and say, I'm going to do that now, because I couldn't, right? Michael is in New York. I'm in Pittsburgh. I can't deliver him a different computer. So I think that that was a really hard thing to do. And to let him out of a moment was to not have a show. So I was stuck, right? I was stuck in a model that I didn't love because I didn't have all the resources I wanted to have.
Yeah, I also think that, I mean, like, part of being a pro, I mean, like, you know, everyone's like talking about being a pro is about money. Well, nobody gets in the theater for money, at least nobody who has any brains. So, but also is how you handle failure. And I think that's one thing that we could mentor them through, right? Like, not that this was a failure by any stretch. I think it was a giant success, but like, we had a lot of trip ups along the way. And so we could, in some ways we could mentor them as like, what are ways that we can get past this and not let these slips and these little failures defeat us, so that we can keep moving forward. And I thought that was, I think that's something that Emery and Gianni do really well, is help them over these humps. And I feel like that's a big job, especially during production work, is we all trip, we all fall down. It's how you get up and keep, do you let it defeat you, or do you get up and keep moving? And I feel like that's one thing that we can model for students, even when we don't know what the heck we're doing.
I'm going to add into that, just because part of my other job is recruiting for Pitt. But what I do want to say is that the model that we have for producing at Pitt puts a lot of trust in students, and not a lot of BA programs do that, or they do it and sort of burn through students. I think what we do pretty well is we show students the edge and keep them from falling over it. But then we continually show them the edge. That's how I would put it.
Okay, we have a question from @Mr. Evans Beard. How did you monitor and get in front of the issues that arise with students learning new skills when you aren't able to as directly observe their work in progress?
Gianni was the whisper on this.
So on the tech side, tech and design side, it was just lots and lots of meetings. I would say it definitely felt like we were doing a film where we had, 2-hour post meetings and then 2-hour pre meetings. But everything was so new. We just needed to make sure that everything was happening. And then in between, we would go and explore the technology ourselves and then come back and say, oh, did you try this? Have you tried this? So that's what I would say on my end.
As directors, for Ricardo and I, Box became our best friend. So I found that was a really useful tool to sort of keep on top of everything that was happening on the tech side. Because when you are working in Skype, when you are working on Zoom as a director, it's really hard, especially when we're working with all these overlays and this formatting. It's really hard to imagine what the finished product is going to look like. And so checking in on the updates to the box every day and just seeing the amazing work that the designers were doing really helped ground me in the world we were trying to create. And they were great at staying on top of that. Really, really impressive. Blew me away.
Yeah, early on, Kelly and I just decided to kind of divide and conquer. So one of us would stay in the room with the actors and help guide them, while the other one would look at the footage as soon as it was posted on Box. And then we could give each, we did a lot of texting. Okay, this worked, this didn't, and I was like, oh, I noticed the student was too close, did it read, blah, 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 or, and then the one that stayed in the Skype room would be able to give notes, and we'd tell each other like, oh, I noticed this, did that come across in the recording? No, it didn't. Okay, don't worry about that. We don't have to reshoot it or whatever it is. So that, I think, helped a lot. We figured that out. It took us till the second day to be
the
first day we were both trying to watch both, and we were driving each other crazy, and nothing was working, and we were just being really frustrated. And finally we're like, why don't we, there's a reason there's two of us. Why don't we take advantage of there being two of us? I don't know why it didn't occur to us.
I called Ricardo and I said, I'm thinking this, and he's like, I was just gonna call you.
I was literally writing the email when she called me. So yeah, so that was helpful. Kelly and I have both done acting on Zoom and readings on Zoom. So, and the teaching aspect of that wasn't as hard for us because we had done this medium before. So for us, it was much more about doing a full production with the tech and how we can be supportive of everyone involved. That was the part that I just didn't know how to help the tech students.
And it was so much trying to get my mind around the enormous undertaking that they had, that they were trying to accomplish. It just, I can't, I'm speechless. I mean, I can't get my mind around the amount of work that they did to get it up and running.
There are times when Kelly and I would be like, we want to send them like a DoorDash, but it's creepy for us to ask for their address, so we're not going to do that. But it would be really nice to send them a pizza or something.
Okay. At the Needs Are asked, how big was the production design team?
So, set design was 2.
Stream team was 2.
Yeah. Streaming 2. Sound
design. 2 of everything except there was a sound designer and an assistant. So the 2 stage managers.
2 stage managers.
We lost her, and then a special effects designer as well.
Yeah. So 10.
Yeah.
3 special effects.
We're losing you, Anne-Marie. You need to tell Hunter to get off the internet. She's gonna be mad at me
on YouTube. So
they're gonna be mad at me.
And I think one thing the department did really, or seemed to work very well, was pairing all the students up. So even if there was one, like Nick was the sound designer, but he had an assistant, right? So every student had another student to also work through the challenges of the process with, as well as their faculty mentors, as well as Kelly and Ricardo, as well as the rest of their peers on the production. And as someone who was not on the production team from the outside, that seemed to be a really effective approach.
Well, yeah, and I mean, like Gianni said, we do place a lot of trust in our students, but our students earn that trust,
yeah.
and they very rarely let us down. So, which is why we keep giving them this trust. So, there was never any doubt. I mean, like sometimes we were worried. Like for instance, we were all worried about Michael, and we wanted to send him food and water, and and maybe caffeine, but there was never any doubt of his abilities ever. We all knew he was capable of doing it. It was just like, what can we do to help him and give him as much time as he needs? What can we do? Like Kelly and I do in the Skype room with the actors while he, while he needs to rebuild the whole show again because he lost everything. All right. We'll do a scavenger hunt in the Skype room with all the cameras up so he can rebuild the show scene by scene again. So it was little things like that we're like, I want to help him as much as I can.
And the student just sent me a message to make sure I remembered that it wasn't ASM. Seamus was the ASM.
Oh, Seamus. Yes, we can't forget Seamus.
Seamus is the best.
Seamus was definitely a communication link in the in the time of very hectic communication between teams and Skype. And then Seamus would just go into the Skype and calmly say where we needed to go.
And that's when Skype started dropping people. We had a green room in Zoom, and then Seamus was giving them places in the Zoom room to go over to the Skype room. So yeah, we couldn't have done it without Seamus. So sorry, Seamus.
And then, as we mentioned, Cami and Jess were the scenic designers. Then Sophia helped with the props, and then we also had 2 students doing painting too.
Right.
So that was a large team of students working in lots of different locations. Right, and I sat in on production meetings. I was amazed at the stage man. Unsurprisingly, Annabelle and Gabriella were on it, right, with so many different pieces moving. Right, there's no concern, right, when they're running the show or running the stage management.
No, I mean everyone had their props at the end by the end of the first week of rehearsal. Everyone had props. They were finished. We were like,
almost everyone.
Almost. Well, I mean. FedEx didn't comply.
Yeah, one was bound to go missing.
We never did find those knives. I don't know what happened to them.
Nope.
But that was not us. That was certainly not the students. We had a tracking number, but Lord knows where that led.
Okay, Atheniser has another question in terms of how the production handled the costuming.
Oh, this is the fun one.
Yeah, this is fun.
So KJ Gilmer, who is a lecturer at the University of Pittsburgh and a professional costume designer, she had online consultations with costumes. And she also looked up a lot of really fun ways to create characters with things that you could find around your own house. So for example, Calliope's ears were made out of Band-Aids. And what were some other ones, Ricardo?
Hair horns.
Yes.
We taught them how to do the hair horns.
The hair horns, like the succubi's horns were made out of their own hair.
Yes.
She just came up with some really creative ways to help tell the story. And in the framework of the concept that Ricardo and I came up with Jess and Cami, it worked so well. This idea of these kids are getting together to play D&D. They're wearing their costumes that they would make out of their own closet. It worked really well and was really fun. And I think the students had a really great time with Karen working in that way.
I think it made them appreciate the costume designer a lot more too.
Yeah.
And they had to fish in their own closet, how resourceful sometimes we have to be with those things. But we were really, with us pushing this is a homespun module and everything is created by these high school students. I feel like all of it worked conceptually really well, and it was and everyone executed it really well. It was really fun.
Okay, so we have a from the YouTube chat. Hunter said that for the record, their Wi-Fi is off. So just
I knew they would be mad at me.
Clear that if Amory has problems, it is not Hunter's fault. We have one more. We have one more question from the Neezer. What production or performance goals were you ultimately unable to achieve?
Well, we really did want it to be live streamed, and it just we realized halfway through tech that was not possible with the equipment we had. So that, I think that's, for me anyway, that was I'm not disappointed because I love what we came up with, and I love that it was literally a labor of love, a very collaborative labor of love. But it would have been fun to do it live, and that comes with its own set of like whose internet might fall out, and we did early on say like, what are some things that we can improv if somebody forgets to turn their mic on or somebody drops or freezes? What are some things that we can do to stay in the world? And we did work on that in the early rehearsals, which we didn't end up having to do. Although there was a really good save once where the narrator came on, she goes, and Chuck could still not be heard because he kept forgetting to turn his mic on. So it was fun stuff like that. But I think that was one thing that we had to kind of let go of emotionally.
It's exciting though to think about, like, so this was our trial run for this new online performance world for University of Pittsburgh, and I think that it's exciting to think about like if that's going to be a possibility down the line. And I fully trust that the people working on these productions are gonna figure that out. If it can be done, we will do it somehow.
I mean, like all productions, when you go back and watch it, there's things that you're like, oh, I wish we could do this. I wish we could do that. I do think I would have had a heart attack had we not started to film things because students, like all of a sudden they're just gone in the Skype room. They're like, bye, Chuck. or a technical student's whole computer, literally has smoke coming out of it. Not literally, but it felt that way. So that took the pressure off. I still had to call Gianni and be like, we're still going to have a show. But I can say that where we got was exceptional for the time that we had, the technology we had, that we didn't limit any student except for the one student, international student, that we just couldn't we tried everything.
Really
and we could, and literally we couldn't find something that was legal. So we couldn't do it. And but other than that, we didn't limit any students. We didn't right. So one student, TJ, we thought TJ would be doing some of the more OBS stuff, but his internet, but he did all this other stuff. He did a big part of the opening and the part of the closing, and helped Michael enormously, right? They really were a team. So where we got, I couldn't be more proud of of the product. I'm very proud of the product we put out, because we put out something that we'd never done before, and we did it. And I am extraordinarily proud of Pitt theater students that stuck with it when this was not an easy thing to do. And then the pressure of a New York Times article coming out in the middle of it, they had to stand up to that pressure. So I think that they stood up to every pressure we gave them. So I couldn't ask for more of them, and I'm really proud of them. So of course, there's little things that we would do different from what we learned, but we got to a very special place as a collaborators, as a unit, and we put out a show that we can be proud of for being the first time we ever tried it.
Yeah, and I just want to add, because we're also putting it, like, this is not something that a lot of people have seen before, and I'm also proud of us, because this is a chance for us to do, like, this is kind of a pause button right in theater right now, where we can't get together and do theater, and it's kind of silly for us to try to recreate theater like it was when there's no way we can do that here. So it's a chance to be more inclusive in some ways. In this week we found out that we we had a misstep, right? We had an email from a patron who wanted to see the show, who didn't have very good eyesight and was wondering if we had audio description. And we didn't, we didn't have that. We had talked about closed captioning, but we hadn't talked about audio description. And we're like, all right, we can't get it together. We will contact this patron, but now we know, right? Oh, this is something that shouldn't be an afterthought. If we want to be inclusive of folks, we need to not make them feel like they have to ask us for things. We should be able to do this. So we know we have done research now. We're working on being able to do our next production where we do have this. And as we go forward, I think this is a great opportunity for us to be like, how can we be more inclusive? Our Pitt buildings are old, not, as someone who has bad knees, being backstage is really difficult sometimes. I have to go up and down stairs to make entrances. What are ways that we can make it easier so that we can have more students involved and we can have more folks in the audience? So I think this is a great way for, and to include our students, and we're like, what are ways that we can move forward and make this a more collaborative and more inclusive art form?
And for our last question of the evening, what advice or recommendations would you give programs planning or considering online productions in the fall?
Other than hiring Gianni Downs, that's will be my number one.
You can't have him.
You can't steal him. I know he's ingrained in Pittsburgh. I'm safe. I can say it. But that would be my number. So hire your own Gianni Downs, and someone who's in it with you, right? Gianni he has high technical skills and he's in it with them. So my other advice is to make your choices and go for it, and understand that this is new, that it's not going to be exactly what you were doing in your theaters. You've all been doing that in programs for years, right? Some programs decades, right? So it is something new and it's going to take some time. So be patient with yourselves as faculty and teachers and producers, and find what would work for you and the group you're working with, and then do that the best that you can, right? And let the learning lead you. I believe that all the students that were involved can say what they learned in this process. So let the learning lead you, and I think you'll be successful.
Similarly, I think embracing the unknown, and so embracing the unknown, knowing that nobody knows what they're doing and you're all going to figure it out together, is incredibly empowering. And I think it is all rooted in the idea that theater is a collaborative art form. And if you put all your eggs in that basket, you're going to be successful. The way that you gauge success in this medium is different than the way that you gauge success on the stage. But if you have everyone collaborating and working towards a product like we all just did, you will find your own degree of success.
We started rehearsal with, one of the things we started rehearsals with is no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. And I like to say that at the beginning of every rehearsal so that we all listen to each other. And that's one of the things that I always start rehearsals with, at least recently. And I think that echoes what Emery and Kelly have been saying, which is like, it's okay to say, I don't know. As an educator, sometimes it's better to say, I don't know, than to try to shove them into something that we're unsure about. Because then we can figure out the solution that works best with the folks that are in the room. So, and the other thing I'd say is, communication is key with this. So just keep having, I know nobody likes meetings, but discussing meetings and capabilities and what we can, what are the expectations and what are the things that we can and cannot do based on our research, so that everyone goes into rehearsal with the same set of expectations and they're not all over the place. Because there's nothing worse than people having high expectations and your ability level is here and somebody's expecting this. So making sure that everyone is on a level playing field before you start rehearsals, I think would be helpful.
Do you want me to add in that? So what I was going to say was essentially, that many of our students will be upset with, which is collaboration. That you need to have a team, whether it's students and faculty and staff, that trust each other and genuinely like each other, whether it's in the theater or outside. But without working together, it's just not gonna work.
Thank you, Amory, Gianni, Ricardo, Kelly, Michael, Nick, Annabelle, Gabriella, and Lisa. If you're interested in checking out our production of She Kills Monsters, it's available through July 26th. It costs 99 cents. It's available if you go to play.pitt.edu or any of our social media accounts on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. You can also get the direct link to Vimeo. So thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you.